Welcome back, everybody, this week in America. Thank you for joining us on the program. It's called The Journey of Fame and Suffering, Perseverance and Dreaming, the fascinating story of immigrant actor M.B. Curtis, delivered by author, historian Richard Schwartz in his newest book, The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of M.B. Curtis. 1886, the Statue of Liberty stood unlit and unloved by American politicians engaged in a congressional funding deadlock. To the rescue, actor M.B. Curtis, who was creating a theatrical sensation at New York's 14th Street Theater. As an immigrant, he couldn't bear to see the Statue of Liberty go unlit, so he paid to have it lit himself. The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty is the story of great successes, great disappointments as well, of M.B. Curtis, actor, producer, real estate developer, promoter, benefactor, and a murder suspect. This is the fifth book for the acclaimed author Richard Schwartz. Previous works, Eccentrics, Heroes, and Cutthroats of Old Berkeley, Earthquake, Exodus, 1906, the only book to focus on the refugees and relief effort instead of the disaster, Berkeley, 1900, and Circle of Stones. An outdoor enthusiast, animal lover, he worked on a Pennsylvania Dutch farm before heading in search of higher mountains out west. A former firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service, a musician, now lives in Berkeley working as a building contractor. He documents early Native American sites in the Bay Area. Written numerous articles, has spoken to hundreds of groups promoting history. Richard Schwartz, author of The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of actor M.B. Curtis. Chosen by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Margaret Herrick Library to be included in their collection, and he's with us on This Week in America. Richard, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Rick. I'm real happy to be here.
This is a fascinating book of someone in history I had never heard of till I started reading the book, and just fascinated by this guy. And this is something that, as I'm reading the book, it's like 1996, you're researching another book, and this character basically jumped out at you and grabbed your attention.
Yeah, it was almost as if he reached out and physically grabbed me, because I had never, ever come upon anyone like this in any of my studies. And I bought all the out-of-print Berkeley history books, and he was in them all. And compared to the other characters in the book, these old out-of-print histories, he was wholly different. There was no one that compared to him. And the more I learned of him in doing my own research, the bigger the picture got, till it became almost ridiculous. When you ask people what are the two major icons of the United States culture, 90% have said the Statue of Liberty and Mark Twain. And he's intimately involved in both, yet you've never heard of him. And then there's the pioneer in the silent movie industry, and it just goes on and on and on. And he's totally forgotten until now.
You know, it's interesting because you said this was like a 20-year journey for you, and it's really not complete, is it? You still find interesting information on M.B. Curtis.
That's what I learned, is that it'll never end. And the fascinating thing is, every now and then, someone will buy a home in the Midwest and go up in their attic and find some theater posters, or open up a wall and someone put 3 theater posters in the wall, and one of them will be from M.B. Curtis's plays. And it's just that it doesn't stop, especially with the internet now as well. If you go to a garage sale, you're only you're getting people from the neighborhood stopping by. And what's happened now is, with the internet, you can have the whole country come to your garage sale. So, and you're notified of when something of interest is, for sale.
Yes. The book is called The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of actor M.B. Curtis. Richard Schwartz, the author, is our guest on the program. Let's go back. I mentioned in the beginning, it's like 1886. This guy is the sensation on Broadway, and he's an immigrant, and he looks and he sees the Statue of Liberty. Pick up the story there, how this guy came in with his own funds and lit the torch of Lady Liberty.
Sure. He was catapulted to overnight fame and success in December 1879. By the end of 1880, he was the #1 actor. He had the longest running play in New York City of its day, And the nation couldn't get enough of him, and they were following his every move. The President of the United States was compared to his character. The play was called Sam'l of Posen. And after, about 6 years of this, he started a new play, and he came to New York to perform this new play. The Statue of Liberty was dedicated November 28th, 1886. Bartholdi, the designer of the statue, and dignitaries from all over the world came for this dedication. And Curtis arrived in New York 3 days after this. And a few days after he arrived, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, cut off the funding to the lighting of the Statue of Liberty. It was only meant to be temporarily lit for this particular funding, and they would not allocate the funds to light the statue. And it went dark. And he immediately contacted the government. As an immigrant, it particularly affected him. And I'm sure there was, the genius of publicity as well. It was a combination, I think, of patriotism and publicity. There was his play, and the next thing you know, when the government said, no, Congress has to allocate the funds, we won't take your money. Curtis was 6 years old when he came from Hungary, so he grew up an American. And especially in those days, the culture was saying fierce independence and Americans get things done. And so based on that, he kept thinking, well, I need this statue to be lit. This is wrong that this statue is not lit. So he just approached the workers, reached in his pocket, and took out $800 and said, light the statue. And he did. And he's the only American in the history of the country to ever do that. And for that alone, he should be standing next to Paul Bunyan in American mythology.
Exactly.
And yet he's totally forgotten.
And you mentioned the Mark Twain connection. Talk about that, because he actually was asked by Twain to be in a play of Twain's.
Exactly. The character Sam'l of Posen in M.B. Curtis's signature play was a drummer, and a drummer is like a traveling salesman. But what we don't realize here in the 21st century is this is a time when drummers and salesmen, professional salesmen, were just starting as a whole trade and a concept. And there was a lot of resistance. Americans felt, there's a personality behind all of us, especially the men, and it's predictable and should be stable. And whereas a traveling salesman, if he comes to town and he knows this particular general store owner is a quiet religious man, he'll be very soft-spoken and respectful. And if the guy in the next town who owns the general store loves whiskey and jokes from the city, from the big city, he'll come in with a bottle of whiskey and a lot of jokes. So there was a mistrust of that, and they were away from their wives, they were away from their priests, they were away from their bosses. So the general citizen just felt like these guys are really vulnerable to the temptations in life, and they were kind of mistrustful of them. And the drummers had to band together and form associations and stuff. Well, and if you read Mark Twain in his Life on the Mississippi, 1883, he has a couple of drummers, traveling salesmen, on the paddle boat, and it's kind of an excoriating little passage where all they can talk about is business. So he clearly was being the voice of his day, and yet, some few years later, when he did Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, the main character, Hank, is basically a salesman. And he has, he's thrown back into the Middle Ages, and he has knights in shining armor, but they have sandwich board advertisements on them because of Hank. So you can even see Mark Twain even shifted with the country in his comfort level of traveling salesman and the concept of a salesman. So Twain always needed money because of his printing press invention that he was financing and his own family needs and such. So he contacted his best friend from childhood and asked him to write theatrical version of Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court and get it produced on Broadway so Twain can get some more funds. And all the New York producers were turning him down. And then he approaches M.B. Curtis. And M.B. Curtis said, I would be thrilled to do that. I could put $20,000 into producing it, but I have one criteria. And Twain's friend said, what is that? And M.B. Curtis says, Hank, the character, has to be portrayed as Sam'l of Posen, my character in my play, a Jewish immigrant drummer. And Twain and his friend talked it over. They both had seen Curtis perform. They both knew, how phenomenal his characterization was. And they talked about the similarities between Hank and Sam'l of Posen, which are many. They're both thrown into a world they didn't know, one into the Middle Ages, the other from Poland into America. Neither of them had any backup, inheritance, funds, and they relied on their wits and their ability and friendships with people. So there were amazing characteristics similar between the two characters. And Twain and his friend talked it over, and Twain says, this is a great idea. I'm all for it. And his friend went back to Curtis and said, let's do it. Curtis was on tour. He had to leave town to continue his tour, and he said, as soon as I come back, we'll sit down and work this out and sign it up and schedule it. And Twain got so desperate, he just called his friend. Well, he didn't call his friend. There were no telephones. He contacted his friend and, said, take whoever will give me some money immediately. And they found a couple of producers who would do that. And the play never was produced. And, but the story is that here Mark Twain knew of, had seen, and contacted M.B. Curtis to perform Hank in Connecticut Yankee, and was happy for him to change it to Sam'l of Posen, in King Arthur's Court. So this is a phenomenal, endorsement of a man who's totally forgotten. So now you have these two monumental things, and we're just beginning the story.
Well, yeah, and this is just one of many, many stories, and many that got left out, and hopefully there will be a sequel on M.B. Curtis in the book, The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of Actor M.B. Curtis. Richard Schwartz is the author and our guest on This Week in America. His website is richardschwartz.info. Book is available all across the country. Information at Richard's website as well. Link on to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and go directly to Richard's website and get information on the book. As I said, rapidly running out of time, but what you have to imagine, and suddenly as you're reading the book, you understand this, he was huge at the time, not just on Broadway in New York City. He had bases in New York as well as San Francisco, toured the country with his wife. He really was a national sensation, wasn't he?
They followed his every move. The President of the United States was compared to his character. Teddy Roosevelt was compared to his character. Members of Congress were compared to his character, Sam'l of Posen. And I even found a mugshot of a pickpocket in Chicago. And there's a photo of him, and you turn it on the back, and it has his name and crime. It said pickpocket. And then it said alias. And his alias was Sam'l of Posen. So everybody wanted to be part of this, lovable, happy, comedic drummer. The character. And it said that people couldn't understand how or why it happened, but even him walking on the stage, the way he did it caused hysterical laughter. He was such an artist. And, I've read hundreds of critics' reviews, and they all say, this is a totally original characterization. We've never seen anything like it, and the audiences don't stop laughing from the time the curtain goes up till it goes down. And people would see it 10 times or more.
We've talked about the successes. A couple of minutes left in the program. In the book, the title, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall, fame gave him tremendous opportunities, you're right, but also trouble found him. He had ups and downs, and I think that's one of the things I think that you really admired about him, is when he got kicked down, he pulled himself back up again.
Yeah, he he had Herculean challenges. He was accused of murdering a policeman, and he went through 3 trials over 2.5 years. And here's a guy who lives to interact with people. There's nothing he likes more, and he's always, donating his time and his money to causes like helping a fireman's family who was killed in the line of duty, or, buying the fire department a new bell and a new station, and giving baseball teams uniforms and getting them a band without them even asking. He was always doing things like this. So to be imprisoned and to be accused of murder, over 3 trials, was just, it would have crushed the normal person.
Right.
And yet he withstood it. He was changed afterwards, no doubt, and it took a tremendous toll on him. But he always got back up. He always got back up no matter what, and continued his creativity.
And he was given credit in the book, originator of the elongated shoes that Chaplin used in The Tramp, signature hand gesture of Jack Benny. It's interesting, he's been dead for a number of years, but his influence sort of invisibly still lives on.
And that's the key word. It's invisibly, he's still affecting us. But nobody has ever studied where all these influences came from. Yeah.
The final chapter in the book is a long, slow fade, and that really, it's sad when we get to the end of the book and see how this ends the problems with the drinking created by all of the problems, spousal issues, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, today we would say, well, these 3 being accused of murdering a policeman for 2.5 years created, we would call it post-traumatic stress. But he, in his day, he was forced to just start carrying on as soon as this chapter of his life was done. And that he did, but I don't think he ever had the chance to deal with, the damage and the cost inside of him. And therefore he started drinking, and the drinking really affected every aspect of his life. And yet it didn't stop his creativity.
Yes.
Because it continued for the rest of
That's
his life.
what's amazing, the resilience. And a minute or so left in the program. How and why has he been forgotten in history?
Well, I think once he passed away, and there were no records of his movies because they didn't survive. At least nobody's found any yet.
Right. You
never know. They might be in Russia. Russia loves silent movies. And that's why we know Chaplin and Keaton, because we can still watch them. And you'll notice that very, very few people know any actors from the 18th century, except maybe John Wilkes Booth for other reasons.
Yes.
So it's only when film came to help us understand, the magic of these people and their performances that helped you remember. And plus, his play went from 1879 and into the 20th century. Times change. And I think the country had kind of like moved on and had other issues at that point. And thusly, the major reason being no movies survived, and he was forgotten. And all the people who knew him pass away, and that was it. And, but the Statue of Liberty alone, and the Mark Twain story alone, and, he worked with Fatty Arbuckle. Nobody knew that. So that's how he was forgotten. Nothing survived.
We do now know about M.B. Curtis, thanks to the book The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty, The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of Actor M.B. Curtis. It's an excellent read. It leaves you wanting more, and hopefully there will be more. I know you've got a lot of research and a lot of great information out there. Would love to see this on the big screen because it's such an impactful story, The Man Who Lit Lady Liberty. The Extraordinary Rise and Fall of Actor M.B. Curtis. Our guest on the program, Richard Schwartz. The website, Richard Schwartz. That's SCHWARTZ.info. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly. Richard, it's an excellent book. Thank you so much for being with us on the program.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us, and we're back after these messages.